Hello. Today is Rosh Chodesh Adar, so happy Adar. We'll speak about joy in Adar as we get further into the class, but today we're in Parsha Terumah, which is a very special Parsha. Every Parsha is a special Parsha, but this one is the beginning of the Mishkan, where we build this special place where God will dwell even more than every place else. Very interesting. So we see that the second half of the book of Exodus presents a major shift from the first half of the book. Until this point, God was the active member in the relationship with the Jewish people. God brought the 10 plagues. God liberated the Jews from Egypt, split the sea, spoke the first 2 commandments and the rest of the 10 commandments, dictated Jewish civil law, while the Jews were passive recipients of all that God was doing. So that's what's been going on so far. Now, we're in the second half of the book, and the Jewish people were called upon to take the initiative. This is something different. And they were told to build a home for God, make me a sanctuary, and I will live in them. Now, this is a very interesting grammatical piece here, because when it says make me a sanctuary, it would ordinarily say, and I will live in it, because we're talking about a sanctuary, which is a place. So when it says not I will live in them, so there is a double meaning here. There is an it, because a sanctuary is going to be built. That is what they're being asked to do. But also the sanctuary has to do with ourselves. Make a sanctuary and I will live in them. So since the Mishkan is referred to, why does the phrase say dwell among them? And the them is the heart of each and every Jew. So when it says build me a Mishkan, it's saying, and I will dwell in the heart of each and every single Jew. So we're making this place for God, and God will dwell in this place, whatever that means. But also God will dwell in us, in whatever that means. So the sages teach that the commandment to construct a home for God includes the directive to construct a figurative home for God within every person. Now, constructing a sanctuary would ensure that God's presence would dwell among the people, not just in the tabernacle. Now, for the first time since leaving Egypt, when God had taken complete care of the people, they were now being asked to become active participants in the relationship. Now, 2 parshas ago was Yitro, when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. And pretty much the Jews were passive because God was the giver and the Jews were the receiver. Then last week was Parshat Mishpatim, where God is telling people, when you're in the world, this is how I would like you to behave. Do this, don't do that. When you come into any situation in life, how do you know what to do? And so Mishpatim made it clear that there is guidance for every single kind of situation. But not only that, but that as we are learning Torah, we have a sense of what it is that God wants from us. Some of them are specific mitzvot, some of them are behaviors, so that we know how to handle a moment in life. We spoke last time about Viktor Frankl, and how Viktor Frankl was saying between something that happens and your response is a moment. And that moment is a moment of free choice, where we are able to say, how would God like me to respond in this case? Sometimes there is a specific mitzvah. God wants us to do this in this kind of case. Sometimes it's a specific negative mitzvah. Do not do that. So you have that moment to think about it. Sometimes we have to ask a Rav, which means to ask. This is a legal situation where I have to understand what is the right thing to do and ask the Rav what it is. And sometimes there are learnings that we do, for example, that it says that anger is like idol worship. Now, this is talking about emotional anger, which is a reaction. And we were saying that Viktor Frankl was saying, take that moment between what just happened and how you're going to respond, and leave that moment to have that moment of free choice. So obviously being angry is not what God wants. So we're learning here how God wants us to live. And then at the end of last week's Parsha, it says, it goes back and reminds that the Jews said, Na'aseh v'nishma, that there was a devotion where God said, whatever you want me to do, I'm going to do that. Now, in this Parsha, in Terumah, something completely different is going on, even though it is very connected to Sinai. And now for the first time since leaving Egypt, when God had taken complete care of the people, they were now being asked to become active participants in the relationship. So the building of the Mishkan, along with donating its materials, would start to transform them from receivers to givers. That we are able to say, what can I do for you? What offering can I give? Before that, how can I build the Mishkan? What would you like me to do? So from this perspective, and it says right away at the beginning that whoever would like to should bring gold, silver, precious materials. And this is something that somebody can understand. If there was going to be that God was saying, let's build the Mishkan right now, somebody would not find it difficult to take off their gold bracelet and say, here, this is for you, God. This is my contribution. I want to give this. And it comes from a loving heart that we want to give back, because everything that we have is from God. Where do we get the gold bracelet in the first place? It's a gift from God. We need to know that whatever we have is a gift from God. So from this perspective, the detailed descriptions of the temple and the furniture also have a spiritual connection within ourselves. So we're giving something that is physical. We're taking off that gold bracelet and saying this is for the building of the tabernacle. For another person, they take off their silver earrings. They have a bolt of beautiful purple material that they were going to use to make a dress. Oh, you want purple fabric? I have purple fabric. So this giving was from the heart. But in this giving and this building, the detailed descriptions of the temple and its furniture also have a spiritual connection within ourselves. So what are we giving? And what does it mean that it's connected also to the spiritual, that we're going to have a tabernacle within ourselves? What does that actually mean? Now, the Parsha is called Terumah, which means contribution. And here the people have been asked to give supplies and construction for the sanctuary. Now this, till the rest of Shemot, in other words, for the second half of the book of Shemot, this is discussing the components of the building of this dwelling for God. The next book, Vayikra, starts to talk about the sacrifices done in this Mishkan. In other words, now we're talking about the building of the Mishkan, then we're talking about how to utilize this Mishkan. So the sanctuary was an elaborate tent made of various complex fabrics and with a sophisticated and difficult construction plan. This plan was made by God, how God wanted everything to be, where everything was going to be. Inside were housed the luchot, the 2 tablets inscribed with the 10 commandments. And the Mishkan was also a place from which God spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, the center of this place that had the two tablets placed within it was the place, and there were two cruvim, like cherubs above it. And then from that place, God's speech would come down and out to Moshe, who would hear it. And of course, God is everywhere and can't be limited. There's so much to say about this, that the two luchot are in the center there. And we have to understand that the two luchot were given on Mount Sinai. And there is a connection between Mount Sinai and the tabernacle. This is, God gave the two luchot on Sinai, and where did they wind up? In the center of the Holy of Holies. So we see this connection between God and what God is giving, and this place where it is going to be received in the Holy of Holies. So, of course, God is everywhere and can't be limited. But in terms of revelation, the Mishkan was constructed by the divine architect. This was God knowing where he wanted everything to be. And the reason for it was to reveal the greatest degree of godliness. So this is where people went to connect in a special way. I'm going to speak about that a little bit more. Later, this building was developed into the first and second temples and will be rebuilt into the third temple with the coming of Mashiach. Now, at the simple level, the building process of the Mishkan, it's very interesting, is used as a reference point in halacha, in Torah law, to learn the laws of Shabbat. There are 39 principal laws of Shabbat and hundreds of subcategories that are all learned from the fact that activity that has to do with the Mishkan stopped on Shabbat. So the work that was done to build the Mishkan was done during the week, and then the work stopped. Now, you could say the Mishkan is so important. Why would you stop building the Mishkan? A very interesting concept here. Shabbat, in its own way, is like entering the Mishkan. In other words, the Mishkan is already built. And when we enter into the Mishkan or the temple, we are entering the time space of holiness. There is a comparison between Shabbat and the Mishkan. When we go into the Mishkan or the temple, we are going into this special level of holiness. And when we go into Shabbat, we go into that same level of holiness. So there is no need to build it. Like Hashem said, to keep the Shabbat, we just stop before the Shabbat. And we stop the building of the Mishkan also before Shabbat. I would like to also mention that in a certain way, on the spiritual level, the work that we do during the week is like building the Mishkan or the Beit HaMikdash. We're doing the work to make it built, to bring godliness into the world. And those are 39 melachot, 39 kinds of work that we have to do during the week. But when it comes to Shabbat, all of this stops. And we enter this holy time space. It's very interesting that we see now in physics, because it's very interesting. I think it's said in the Arizal in the 16th century said that the time would come that science would prove the truth of Torah. So one of the things it says is that we have time and we have space, and they seem very special because during the week, everybody had to get to this place, whether you drove in a car to come here in person or you had to say, just a minute, I have to check, it's time to turn on my computer. Whatever it is that we're doing, however we got to this place, time and space are separate. We have to bring them together during the week. According to physics, the actuality is that there is such a thing as time-space, where time and space come together. Now, we feel this most on Shabbat, because we say, it's customary, we say, I'm going into Shabbos, I'm going into Shabbat now. What does it mean I'm going into Shabbat? Sorry, I can't do that for you, I'm in Shabbat. We say it like it's a place. I'm in Shabbat, I'm going into Shabbat. And it is a time space that after the coming of Mashiach will be revealed that time space is a reality. And in all of time space, we will experience godliness. Now, when we go out of Shabbat, so here I'm saying that go out of Shabbat as if it's a place, it's because it's a time place. I remember that it used to be very hard for me to go out of Shabbat because I like Shabbat. I mean, Shabbat is this holy time space where we don't have to take a car and go meet somebody, or we don't have to go out to another place. We're in the time space. Okay, so we may walk to the Beit Knesset, but we're in that time space even as we walk to the Beit Knesset. So we're doing what we're doing, but we're in that time. So when we go out of Shabbat, I have one friend in Israel, I remember that right after she got out of Shabbat, she had a lot of little boys. Right after, she would be at the laundry, throwing in the wash immediately after Shabbat. Now, she's very efficient and she had a lot of little boys. So she had quite a pile, and that was her way of getting started into the week. That didn't work for me. I was like, no, I need to stay in Shabbat. I love Shabbat. And it was hard for me to leave. And I remember I discussed this with my teacher, Rabbi Ginsburg, and he said, which was very interesting and helped a lot. When we go out of Shabbat, where are we going? To the next level of building the Beit HaMikdash. Because that's what we do in the world. During the week, we build the Beit HaMikdash, or the Mishkan. On Shabbat, it's already built. And he said, very interestingly, that if after Shabbat, we discover that the Beit HaMikdash has actually been built, and we don't have to go out of Shabbat, because there's going to be a time that's called Yom Shekulo Shabbat, which means 1,000 years of Shabbat. So if we don't need to build it anymore, we don't have to go anyplace. We just kind of stay in that space, whatever that's going to mean. But if that has not yet happened, then we go forward to build the next level of Beit HaMikdash. And that is a good feeling, because we're still staying connected to the holiness. We're staying in the giving aspect of going forward to build. And this is what this parsha is really, really about. Now, at a deeper level of the spiritual aspect of building the Beit HaMikdash in our hearts, the actual fabrics and materials for the construction of the Mishkan, together with the implements inside, are all important for separate reasons. In other words, just like in a house, this chair at this table is the Shabbat table, is the place where you have special events. In another room, another table is for something else. So in the Mishkan, everything has its purpose. And these materials and vessels, even though we don't have the Mishkan right now, or the Beit HaMikdash, all of it still functions spiritually in the soul of every Jew. So all of these vessels are still within us. Now, the sanctuary itself was built of 3 components. The walls were made of 10-cubit tall wooden beams. So we have these wooden beams that are 10 feet tall. The beams were supported by silver sockets, which were at the bottom on the floor so that you could put the beam into it, and the next beam would fit next to it. And the roof, which went over the entire building, was composed of coverings made of wool and animal skins. Now, to build the figurative temple within ourselves, we need to find the beams, the coverings, and the sockets within our soul and dedicate them to the service of God. So we have to understand, what does that mean within ourselves? So the Kabbalists explain that the 10 cubit beams represent the 10 faculties of the soul. Now we have the way that God makes us is obviously from above, so to speak, and brings down the soul into 3 intellective faculties through Keter, Chachma, Bina, Dat, and then 7 emotional, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchut. It's a way of bringing the soul and into actuality down into the world. So it's coming from above, coming through us, through our soul, bringing us to be able to live in the world and act in the world. And that's parallel to the beams, which come from above to below, or from below to above as we reach up to God. So these 10 cubit beams represent the 10 faculties of the soul. So we have this within ourselves. The foundation of the entire structure, which was what was on the floor, were the silver sockets into which the beams were inserted. Now, the spiritual equivalent of the sockets, the foundation of the soul's structure. So what do these silver sockets mean? The capacity to be committed and devoted to someone or something. So this is where this is basic and foundational, that we can devote ourselves to God and be completely dedicated to God. And this is something that each one of us has. Now, this is, you could say, emunah, which comes from above. But when we have this connection with God, this is a dedication that is unchangeable. It's a devotion, a complete devotion. So people have this for somebody that they're very close to, a devotion where that's it, they're dedicated, that's that. And it's very bottom line. So we have the beams, which are the 10 faculties of the soul coming from above to below, Chachma, all the way through Malchut. Then we have the foundational silver sockets. And then we have the curtains that served as the roof of the tabernacle, covering the entire structure. And they represent a person's will and capacity for pleasure. Now, that is actually coming from above. We have in Keter, we have emunah, which is faith, ta'anug, which is pleasure, and ratzon, which is will. That's what's in Keter. Emunah, ta'anug, ratzon. Faith, pleasure, will. And these are called encompassing powers of the soul because they are around the soul, coming from higher than Chachma Bina Dat, higher than the intellect, higher than the emotions. So you could say, isn't pleasure an emotion? Isn't will an emotion? No. Certain things that bring us joy are things that are coming from a higher level. Why is one person get pleasure from music and another person doesn't get music at all? Why does one person have a desire to do a certain thing, or maybe to marry a certain person. Another person, I don't get what you see in that person, or I don't know, why do you even like to do that? But these are things that are coming from above. This is in our soul. And it's very important for us to know, to notice what gives us true pleasure and what is a place of will that we have. I remember once I helped him make a shidduch with a couple where he wanted to live in Jerusalem and give tzedakah and do things for other people. She, who he didn't know, wanted to live in Yerushalayim and give tzedakah to people to make a difference in Yerushalayim. So I was the first person who thought of them. I didn't actually make the shidduch because it got a little complicated. Yes, you do. And you do too. And they had this same will and pleasure. Now that's above the intellect, because from the intellect, it would really be nice. I like to, whatever, I like to go to Jerusalem. I do like to go to Jerusalem. I like to bring tzedakah. I really like to give tzedakah. But for some people, this is their higher will, their higher pleasure and their higher will. This is what they wanted to make their life for. So this is how they made their home. This is how they recognized each other. That's how they made their home. That comes from something higher. So that's something that we need to understand that. So will and pleasure are the qualities which are above us, are relating to the covering over the Mishkan. So the sages are teaching us, it's very interesting, that a person should always study where his heart desires. People choose. Of course, it's always good, in Chabad, we learn Chitat, we learn the Parsha of the Torah, piece of it every day, and we learn Tanya every day, we say Tehillim every day. Some people learn Gemara every day, we also learn Rambam every day. What is it that draws you? And for a person, it's very important to say, I would like to learn this. This draws me. When I learn this, I feel connected to God. Not everybody, of course, theoretically, everybody learns everything. But when we say, this is what I need, this speaks to me, that's coming from the soul. Because the encompassing power of will triggers and awakens the specific power of understanding. So what makes us understand Torah, which is God's Torah, which means to connect to God, comes from what in us is something that moves us. It's very interesting. Some people like Jewish music. It speaks to them. Some people like Hasidic stories. I do. It's very inspiring to me. What awakens us, whatever it is what we should be doing, because it awakens us, because it comes from our soul. So understanding that the temple is a symbol for the human soul and bringing godliness into the human soul that's explaining the commandment that the Jewish people should donate the materials necessary to construct the sanctuary. Now, in this week's Parsha, the Torah is telling us that each individual donated both to the construction of the walls and to the covering of the sanctuary in the amount that they chose, according to their heart's desire. So this says this right away in the beginning of the Parsha. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and have them take for me an offering from every person whose heart inspires him to generosity. You shall take my offering." So for certain components of the building, which has to do with the beams and the covers and the gold and the silver, all that was necessary, God was saying, let them find their inner generosity and give that. And this is something that a person could say, oh, yes, that bracelet, if I would have that opportunity to give that bracelet to the building of the Mishkan, I would be so happy to give it. Now the moment has come. Oh, I would love to give that. And the person who's giving the cloth or the silver, or they say, I want to give this. It comes from their heart. It's a desire to give. But there was another donation specifically designated for the silver sockets. Remember, the silver sockets are the base on the floor that holds the whole thing up. And we were saying it can be compared to emunah, which is the top above everything else. And that donation, everyone was required to donate an equal amount. This they shall give everyone who goes through the counting half a shekel. The rich shall give no more, and the poor shall give no more than a half shekel. So we have to understand what that means. Some people could give, 100 shekels, 500 shekels, 1,000 shekels. For some other people, they had to say, could you, give a little extra to me so I'll give it back. So I have the half shekel. So for each person, it's different. And yet we see that it's the same because everybody's giving the same amount. So these are the two forms of donations. One with an equal set amount for each person to donate, and another one that was an open-ended donation where each person was donating according to his heart's desire. So everyone had to give the half shekel. And regarding donations, people gave what they could give or what they desired to give. Now, there are aspects where everyone is equal in us, in each and every one of us. Then there are other aspects where each person is unique and has a distinctive contribution to make. Now, when it comes to the specific faculties of the soul, like intelligence, emotion, wisdom, kindness, willpower, each one of us is unique. So the construction to create the structure is individualized. So this is that each of us is who we are with our own specific talents and our own gifts from God. And we have different things to offer. Now, we're offering for the same purpose because the foundation of the structure, which is the relationship with God, is the power of devotion and commitment. And that is the same for everyone. In other words, in the depths of our soul, we are all the same, really the same. And we have our connection with the one God from whom we come. There is only one God. And in that essential part of our soul and where we are, it's just one, and we are one. When it comes to what we are given by God, we have different things to give. And so we have to do both. We have to strengthen that dedication, which is represented by the half shekel, where we're all giving the same thing. What you give and what I give is the same. There's no comparison. We are all one. But when it comes to giving the gold bracelet or the silver bracelet or the cloth that is purple or argam on different colors, different people have different things and different people have different natures. So the nature of our devotion and relationship is based on our specific personality and is therefore unique to each individual. So our dedication needs to be complete. We have to create a sanctuary within ourselves where we're creating a space for God's presence. That means when we start that in the morning, of course, we had that with Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will understand. When we wake up in the morning and we say, Modeh ani lefonecha, which is saying something like, I'm grateful, I'm appreciating, I'm thankful that I'm before you, that you've placed me before you, that you put me here for you. The first word is not ani. It's not I is not the first word. Modeh, which is gratitude, and recognition and acknowledgement is the first word. Acknowledgement I have for you that I'm here. So this is in a certain way it doesn't even have God's name in it when we say Moda Ani, because that first statement that we say is higher than the name of God and higher than the way we think of ourselves. So we start our day with recognizing our connection from the essence of who we are into the essence of who God is. And that's the place where, in a certain way, our dedication is complete. That's the first thing we say. Now, in terms of training ourselves to have this devotion, a lot of people wake up in the morning and say, oh my gosh, I forgot to get the things out of the cleaner. And they go right into the day. But we're learning that the first thing that we need to do is to connect with, recognize that our soul and our connection with God are one. And at the end, it says, Rabba emunatecha, great is your faithfulness. That means God has faith in me, that this day is going to be for the service of God, connected to God. If, when it comes further down the line, I need to pick up the clothing from the cleaners, that's also part of the service of God. But that's not where we start. We're starting in that half shekel. We're starting in that place where we are one with God. Now, our personal sanctuary is recreated day by day, going from the most universal, which is the Moda Ani, which is the half shekel, to what is most particular in nature. In other words, each one of us has our unique, what we need to do. So we have thought and feeling in the fixed forms of prayer. We learn Torah. We have to discriminate between what is God's will and what's not. And we're bringing the service of God into action. This is what we do every day in building the tabernacle or serving in the tabernacle. So both through the universal connection, which we all have, and going to what is specific to our nature, we're thereby bringing God into the depths of our being. And that is the point, to bring God into the tabernacle, to bring God into the depths of our being, where everything we do through all of our souls, our faith, our pleasure, our will, our intellectual capacity, our emotional capacity, our capacity to do in the world and how we express ourselves. We want that God and soul should be brought through all of this. And that's what it really means to make the Mishkan and serve the Mishkan. So that's where we are. And there are going to be more parshas about the Mishkan. Now today, by divine providence, it is Rosh Chodesh Adar. Woo, woo, woo. Happy, happy, because Adar is actually the last of the months. We have two ways of counting the year. One is the year from the creation, and that begins in Tishrei, which is usually in September. But then the first mitzvah that God gives the people when they're in Egypt is to count the calendar, and Nisan is meant to be the first of the months. So we count by the months also. Adar, when you go from Nisan all the way around the calendar, the last month is Adar. After Adar comes Nisan, a new Nisan. So here we are. Nisan is about freedom, the miracle of being brought out of Egypt. In Nisan, we celebrate Pesach. But the first mitzvah that we do is to count the months. So where are we right now? Why did we need a calendar in the first place? Why did God say make a calendar? And the answer was so that we could meet God, because God was going to take the Jews out of Egypt. And so God was saying, on this date, you will take an animal and tie it down. On this day, you will offer the Pesach sacrifice. How could we know when to do that if we didn't have a calendar? So the first thing God said to do was get a calendar. Calendars help. Yes. And the last month, after we've gone through the whole cycle, because it's not like a circle, it's like a spiral. We've gone through the whole year so far, celebrating the holidays, the major holidays. And in this month, we're going to have Purim. So we start with the miracle of Pesach and we end with the miracle of Purim. So God willing, we'll speak about Purim next week. But what we have here in Purim, just to say a word or two, is that Megillat Esther is talking about the paradox of the hidden and the revealed, the hidden divine providence that God is with us all the time. So Megillah means revelation. It's a scroll that's opened. And Esther comes from Hester, which means hidden. So we have here is both revelation and hiddenness. That's the name of the scroll, Megillat Esther. Why? And we don't see that, and God's name is not specifically said in Megillat Esther, because it's talking about, when we were just saying about Moda Ani, that when we're speaking about Moda Ani, God's name is not mentioned there either, because our connection with God is higher than anything that could be described. And here, what the Megillah of Purim is showing is that God is always with us, even when God seems hidden. And this is a paradox. And this is higher than the name of God, because it's not only when God's name is said that God is here with us, but that God is here with us all the time. And this is how we end the month. How the series of the months is through this amazing revelation that is hidden, that God's here all the time. In Nisan, when God took the Jews out of Egypt, that was with a lot of flashy, fiery announcements. I'm here. But in Purim, we don't see that. We have to open our eyes to see it. So this is the holiday. This is the month. So every month has a chush. A chush is like a talent. And the month of Adar is laughter. It's a kind of cosmic joy, like when you get it and you just start laughing. It's such a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful talent that you just get it and you just laugh. It's not the kind of laughter that's silly laughter. It's like real, I get it laughter. And so that's this month's push. Now, this is cosmic joy. We're getting the joy of what this really is. And we see that in the Megillah, it says, V'nahafoch hu, that the situation completely turned around and the hiddenness is clearly sensed and revealed. Sometimes what happens in our lives is we don't understand. We really don't understand. Somebody is waiting for something. A friend was telling me that she would like to get married. And why is this taking so long? But her life has changed so much and she has grown so much in the last 2 years that if she would have gotten married 2 years ago, it wouldn't have been suitable to who she really is, because so much of her has come out. So just that realization, I've been upset because it hasn't happened yet. And you say, wait a minute, there's a reason it hasn't happened yet. I hope it's going to happen, but I see that God is bringing out something in me. And then that turns everything around. Everything turns around and the situation changes. So there's also a letter in every month. This comes from Sefer Yetzirah. And the letter of this month is Kuf. Now, Kaf, Kuf, Kaf, it's Kaf. And when we speak about the letter Kaf, what does it mean? Now, one of the things that we learned, which I love this, Adar is so wonderful. It could mean Kof, which is monkey, or it could mean Kodesh, which is holy. And what do monkeys do? They copy each other. Monkeys make noises or put their hands in certain positions, and the other one will look at them and do it also. Monkey see, monkey do. Holy is something completely different. And in holiness, so the question is, who are we imitating? Are we imitating the other monkeys? In other words, I'm going someplace, am I going to try to dress in a way that the other monkeys are going to think, wow, she looks really amazing because all the monkeys are wearing the same kind of thing? Or am I trying to imitate God, that I want to be holy and I want the way I present myself to look godly? So that's a question. This is what the kuf means, that who am I trying to be? Somebody who follows everybody else? Or am I trying to be so that everybody will like me? Or am I trying to be authentically living God's image? Now, simcha, joy, this is what this month is about. This is a month of joy. Now, being in the month of Adar, it says, Misha nichnas Adar, marbin besimcha. When the month of Adar enters, we increase in joy right from the beginning. That means right now, today, we have to increase our joy. Now, it doesn't say to stop. So we could keep increasing our joy for the rest of the months. Nobody says to stop. But this is a place where we have to bring out our joy. We have to look for our joy. What am I happy about? Count my blessings. I'm so grateful. But also the kind of joy that we recognize that God's here all the time, even though we don't always see it, but God is here from the beginning. So sometimes also Adar has two, during a leap year, there are two Adars, but we find an explicit commandment in the Bible to be happy during the festivals. So there are times when the Torah speaks about joy. King David says in the Psalms, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, serve God with joy. The Rambam, Maimonides, points out that happiness is a fundamental element of our service of God, and its lack is a fault. And according to the Baal Shem Tov, there's nothing that causes as much spiritual damage as a lack of joy. So depression is not good. That's the opposite of what we don't want. It leads people to the wrong place. And the Ben Zoma, who was a sage from the Mishnah, expresses that Ezehu Ashir Hasamech B'chelko, who is rich, he who is happy with his share. So this saying seems to be counterintuitive. A person would think that the opposite is true, that riches cause happiness rather than happiness being a cause for wealth. And here we have a life lesson that wealth is not the product of the situation in your bank account. It's the result of the situation in your mind. So God is giving us what we need for our service of God. And we need to know that everything is divine providence and that God is here all the time. So here we are in Adar. It's the most wonderful time of joy. And that has to do with how we look at things, that we understand that God is here with us. And this paradox that even though God is hidden, that God is definitely here. And when we see that, we have that cosmic joy. So may we have a blessed day, a blessed month, and a blessed always. So may that be